Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evan Mather, president of our Southern California chapter. Welcome to our first lunchtime seminar of 2022. This is going to be the first of many exciting programs we have planned for our members this year. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our chair of programs, Gabriella Golick, who organized our program today. Gabriella, you want to take it over?
Sure. Thanks, Evan, and welcome to everybody who is good enough to join us on this lovely Thursday. We have a really great presentation. It's going to be part of a two-part series. This first part will be the webinar and a way to kind of introduce the site, as well as then we're going to go ahead and have a tour of the site next month. So please keep that in mind. We'll do a little announcement at the end, and you'll look for that available time to sign up for that. So without further ado, thank you so much for attending. And I'm here to introduce Nate Cormier. He's the managing studio director at RIOS. He'll be presenting this beautiful new park presentation, Superbloom, Immersive Beauty in Palm Springs Downtown Park. So with that, I will throw it to him. His video is ready to go, and you should be able to see his screen. So we'll get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Gabriella. I'm Nate Cormier with RIOS. I'm a landscape architect and a managing studio director. And the immersive beauty in the title refers to a particular way of expressing through landscape a connection to region, to larger forces that shape our work. And when I presented on this project, and this is mostly going to be about the project, I just want to give a little bit of context. When I presented on this at ASLA in Nashville, one of the other sessions that I saw that sparked a really interesting conversation was Julia Cerniak, Shannon Nickel, and Chris Reed had a discussion about form, space, and other preoccupations, a conversation about landscape's appearance. And an interesting metaphor emerged where we said, we work on these individual sites, and that day we started calling them the barnacles, but they're always on top of, the metaphorical whale, that there's these bioregional and societal forces that situate our work. And that got me thinking about a lot of wonderful conversations back and forth over 5 years out to Palm Springs with our design team, especially probably the most trips with Jason Shinoda. And we would talk about this individual project and what was going to make this project work, but how this project was reflective of a point of view or a perspective about beauty, and one that particularly is about situating a small project like this in this larger regional identity. How do we give people a taste of place, a terroir in microcosm through a project like this? So I have a lot of other thoughts about immersive beauty and can get into the theory of that and examples of where I've seen it through time, and some examples of other people's work that we're learning from. But mostly I'll just go deep into this project that I think is reflective of this way of practicing. And I should say, obviously, I'm fortunate to be here with you to talk about this wonderful project, but everything like this is the result of an insane amount of collaboration. I told you about all those amazing conversations with Jason, just his design leadership and just sculptural formal intuition was essential to this project. Mark RIOS, of course, our founder, just always an inspiring leader in so many ways. Hee-Jae Lee was super dedicated to figuring out all of these technologies and materialities that would reinforce the story that I'm going to tell you. Ji Wong made, in partnership with our sub-consultant Fluidity, Ji Wong Lee, made this water feature really sing. Mei Wang, Crystal Wang, and Laura Koss. You'll see some architectural elements. I'm going to focus a little more on the landscape, but it really was this integration along with Erin Williams and Misato from our environmental graphics team. All of those as an interdisciplinary collaboration with RIOS is really what I think makes the project harmoniously support this bigger idea of giving people a sort of intrinsic or timeless experience of Palm Springs in the park. So with that, we'll dive in, and I'll start out by setting the context a little bit. Zooming out all the way to the state and tectonic plates and some of the eco-regional contextual things that shape this place, we have two plates that are passing each other, and they cause this twist. So this in Los Angeles, to the north of the LA basin, all of the Hollywood Hills and Bel Air and so forth are sitting on one of those transverse ranges. That's really like the Santa Monica Mountains coming around and moving sideways into the country. And as you go further inland, you have the San Bernardinos to the north and the San Jacinto to the south, and Palm Springs really sits in one of those coves or lobes tucked into. Let's get my mouse up on here. Tucked into the San Jacintos on the south side of the Coachella Valley. And of course, what also happens when you have these plates rubbing up against each other is you have an incredibly geologically dynamic place. And so, even just the word springs, the hot springs that underpin Palm Springs are rooted all the way back into this deep geological understanding of the place. And the fact that they're still ever present and you can still experience those it's really amazing when people can connect with something that is thousands or tens of thousands of years old, and that it's still influential in shaping culture and place. And this depth of understanding the place, of course, is most understood by the native people that lived with it for thousands and thousands of years. The earliest inhabitants of the Coachella Valley are known ethno-historically as the Kawia Indians. And the Kawia are believed to have inhabited this area for over 5,000 years and interacted with tribes as far away as Los Angeles on the coast, Arizona inland, and south into present day Mexico. And you can see along this chain of places that were significant to them in the area around Palm Springs. Of course, it is the springs. It's really the sources of fresh water that would have been so rare and critical to survival in the desert that hosted the seasonal migration of these bands. And of course, the band of Kawia that are most associated with Palm Springs are the Agua Caliente, which means hot water, which of course comes from the hot springs and the deep history and relationship to those. This little example of some artwork from the Agua Caliente is actually an early version of currency, and you can see it's actually made from seashells. And so that just speaks to this larger landscape that they inhabited and the relationships that they had with some of their neighboring tribes. And so the early oral traditions of the Agua Caliente speak of a powerful leader who created this original hot spring, which they called sekhe, which meant boiling water. And it was then the early Spanish explorers and colonial forces that came in and translated that to Agua Caliente, giving this local band of the Kawia its name to this day. You can understand a little bit more if over these 5 years, we've been fortunate to go out to Palm Springs in all the seasons. And it's really clear they didn't just move around for the heck of it. They were responding to those larger bioregional forces. So in the hot summers, they would move up in elevation into some of the shadier, cooler valleys where there was fresh water coming down from the ice melt, where they had the shade. We'll show lots of images of palm canyons where they had the shade, and they would make all of their huts and things out of these native materials. And then in the summers, in the winters, when it got cold, that's when they could move down onto the valley floor and spend more time around the hot springs for heat and fresh water again. And of course, there was, this important relationship between that indigenous culture and the resources in the area. So There were traditional ways of consuming the prickly pear fruits or the yucca flowers and grinding chia seeds. And each of these has like a sort of a more fundamental meeting a human need component, but they also then lead to the development of culture. And this interesting view of the two holes in the rock, which is near a place called Indian Canyons, a really easy short hike. You can go and see these, is a spot where they would actually grind chia seeds into powder to make food. But the presence of multiples of these suggested to anthropologists that they called these the gossip rocks. And this is where, you know, people would go and do this socially, do it in groups. And so this would be an important place for storytelling and transmission of information, hand in hand with, of course, meeting your, you know, basic needs of nutrition and shelter and so forth, this communal life. And as I said, there was this kind of seasonal dimension to the movements of the indigenous people. This would be an example of one of these palm canyons they would move up into in the hotter months, and which, as we think about thermal comfort in public space, for our team really became an essential touchstone to doing our work well, was to understand this ages-old tradition and experience of retreating to cooler locations. So moving into the sort of next layer of history that was influential for us was really this emergence of a hospitality industry. In the late 1800s, around 1887, the first hotel in Palm Springs was constructed next to that Agua Caliente hot spring. And in the early 1900s, this woman, Nellie Kaufman, she's been nicknamed the mother of Palm Springs, and she's really credited with transforming this tiny desert village into the world famous tourist destination that we know today. And she arrived in about 1909 with her husband at that time, and she opened a small, what was called a sanatorium. So it was a place to get well. They knew that the dry air of the desert was good if you had tuberculosis or other respiratory problems, and early indication of what would grow into a huge wellness dimension to the hospitality industry in Palm Springs. And in time, she saw that it isn't just people who are sick who are going to want to come here, but this is going to be a place that everyone wants to spend some time. And so she couldn't convince her husband, so she divorced him, and she grew what became called the Desert Inn into a luxury resort. And the Palm Springs Downtown Park is actually on a portion of what was that original Desert Inn. So that view you can see here in the upper right is like at one of the foothills of the San Jacintos, and that kind of green ground framed by some of sort of Spanish inspired architecture there was the Desert Inn. And eventually it was turned into a mall, and the mall has been redeveloped into what is now a hotel and the park that we're going to see. And there's some other development projects happening in the vicinity. One of the wonderful things that Nellie was famous for, that we've used as a touchstone throughout our design process, is she spoke of what she called the 4 S's: space, stillness, solitude, and simplicity. And every time we got stuck and we said, you know, should we do it like this or should we do it like this, we would say to ourselves, like, what would Nellie do? And we would use those 4 S's to push each other to really make sure we were committed to an appropriate solution that fit Palm Springs. So that reputation for hospitality, of course, grew up into some of its more memorable associations as an international hotspot for Hollywood stars and glamour and the Rat Pack and Maryland and so forth. And that also brought with it a lot of attention from the design community. It coincided with the emergence of Palm Springs as a mecca for mid-century modern architecture and design. And this, was associated with its most significant civic and commercial buildings, its banks and city hall and so forth, but also more domestic settings, the breeze blocks and the Googie pools and, some of the mid-century homes for which, we all flock to Palm Springs during Modernism Week to get a peek at all of that. That was all. So this is where we thought when we started our design process, we're all designers and we thought we would like riff on all of these amazing examples in the built environment. But as we got to know Palm Springs better, we were drawn more and more to this deeper association with seeking something intrinsic in the landscape, something primal or untrammeled. And so we started looking back at who else came out to Palm Springs to find themselves, who are these seekers? And one character in particular really animated us and became sort of a spirit that we would say, well, again, like, what would Bill Pester do? So he's this German guy on the left, and he immigrated to California in 1916 to what he said, study himself with untrammeled nature as his classroom. And he lived he got to know the indigenous people, learned some of their ways, and made a living off of, foraging, carving pieces of wood that he would find. He even built his own guitar and eventually became a bit of a tourist attraction in his own right, where people would arrive, to learn from this proto-hippie who went on to inspire all sorts of other characters. There's a Nat King Cole song about him, and a lot of interesting cultural associations with this notion of going out to the desert to find yourself. And Jim Morrison, you'll see in the background, that's Taekwitz Falls, which you'll see pop up again as one of our inspiration points. And I was telling a friend about all of these people going and finding themselves out in the canyons and waterfalls, and they sent me a funny Instagram link to Yeezy here. During Coachella, he actually got his own personal tour with the Agua Caliente chief. So this instinct that we have to go to the desert, to live our best life, if you will, is not superficial. There's something in the water, there's something in the air, there's something about this place that has inspired that kind of curiosity and that kind of tranquility that has moved people for thousands of years. And so as we move into more contemporary culture, and it's a mecca for modern design, and we've got snowbirds that come and double the population each winter. It's become so hip that they talk about a Coachella way of life, this kind of festivalization of space, and just a general tolerance prevails there. And I think this really contributes to its reputation as an especially inviting place for the LGBTQ community, but it creates a setting that is very welcoming socially, if not so often climatically easy to deal with. It is a place where people can come and really be themselves. And so that's kind of a 10,000 years compressed into about 10 minutes of some of those layers of history and some of that broader bioregional context that we went through as a design team to answer that question for ourselves of what would be authentic in a place like this, something that can encapsulate that breadth of all the way from thousands of year old traditions and natural features to contemporary culture and vitality, that a space, a new commons for the people of Palm Springs needs to embrace. And so since 2017, we've been helping our client is the city of Palm Springs. Many of the council members have been directly involved in every single design stakeholder meeting that we've had out there over 5 years. The Palm Springs Art Museum was influential, the Parks Foundation, and many, many community stakeholders helped us imagine a new 2-acre central park that opened in October 2021. And I think if you have any familiarity with Palm Springs, you know that it is a very active community in terms of its attention to design. So I can say as a 20-year veteran of lots and lots of community processes. You know, we pulled out all our bag of tricks. We had make your own park. We had bubbles, tell us what you want. We had dot exercises. We had online surveys. We had all of that. And I have never, for a population of this size, I have never seen such an outpouring of detailed feedback. We did a survey one time that had 1,300 respondents, and of that, over 700 people wrote like an essay to us, and we read like 700 essays to kind of calibrate our thinking. But just want to say that, you know, what we're going to show you, it looks like you go quickly from a pile of dirt to a finished product, but that 5 years, much of it was a dialogue with extremely articulate, extremely thoughtful stakeholders who had a lot of say in calibrating us as we kind of drew forth all of those qualities from the place that I highlighted in the introduction. So this is a first look at the overall plan. I'll say, just tipping my hat a little bit as to what immersive beauty means to me and means to, I think, some of my colleagues as we, you know, road tripped and talked about these things, is we are much less concerned with geometric plan view, straight lines as a way of conveying meaning. So there's a lot of immersion in terms of getting it almost lost in a place, a kind of sublime overwhelm, but then aha, a discovery, this vibration between losing yourself and finding something is really critical to the quality of immersive beauty that we were seeking here. And so the key areas, I'm going to take them one by one on kind of a tour of some of the things that inspired us and how they translated into the park design. We'll look first at the palm grove and some of the places we visited to understand what character that might have. And then we'll look at this combined feature that is called the Outcrop in the spring. And it is both a way to shield the park from an existing parking structure adjacent. So when you're in the park, you don't feel like you're next to the parking structure. You really feel like you're a part of the larger landscape with a view to the mountains and to the art museum across the street. And it also contains, this is where it gets in a little bit into the architecture, public restrooms, and through the collaboration with stakeholders and working with the city, it was determined that this is the right location for a police substation. So we've got regular visitation by the police and observation of the park, which has been really helpful from in terms of keeping it safe and enjoyable. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a little bit more of the cultural end of things. So it's what we call the theater and this event stage, which has already hosted a whole variety of cultural events. And we look forward to Modernism Week and Film Festival and Coachella, this being kind of a satellite venue as part of that larger cultural and artistic landscape of Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley. All right, so we'll start with the Palm Grove. So this is just a quick view of our imagination of it while we were designing it. Of course, needed to be shady, you know, tackling this issue of thermal comfort. And as we tried to understand what would make that this taste of the larger landscape, we took our team on a series of hikes throughout the region. And this is, I think, that if you're only going to see one of these spaces in terms of a place that's really easy to access and will just, you know, knock your socks off, Palm Canyon is the one. It's really just a place unlike any other that you've ever visited in a natural setting, and it's so close to us. It's a must-see destination, and it can be 120 degrees out, and it often is during the summer. And then you move down into this draw, and the shade plus the creek trickling through, the way sound is experienced in this space, and just, you know, we've done measurements that the cooling effect on both the air temperature and humidity. It's just a marvelous place, and it was a critical inspiration for us in developing the Palm Grove at the new park. And this is Misato, one of our experiential graphic designers on one of our hikes. But one of the things we also loved about this space was, especially if you're spend time in Southern California, palms are used in such a classical geometric way. They're like architects' favorite trees because they don't block any views of their buildings. And, you see them, in our, the 1930s ones in LA as these evenly spaced rows, across the horizon around the LA basin. Or if it's the date palms, you see them again used fairly formally, typically. But when you spend time in this grove, they're all different sizes and shapes, and you get these really wonderful elephant trunk weirdo ones. So when we got started, and TJ and Jason would go to the nurseries, and they would say, no, because they would say, okay, well, we can get them all to you at 18 feet. And say, no, we want your weird ones. Bring us your bedraggled palms, because we want to mix and match and create this spirit of immersion. We're not trying to make it absolutely like straight lines of completely evenly spaced and same height palms in the park design. And this is all of our favorite wiggly one down in the grove. But you can see also the spacing of the palms in the grove is really critical to both creating that closed canopy and just this that sense of getting lost among them. And that's so unusual for us in park design, where so often, we've got septet issues and sight lines, and can the police car driving by see every single thing? And so when we worked with our city stakeholders and said, no, we want to actually bring that kind of density, that sublime quality of, you can't see everywhere all the time. We measured Tamar, thank you, Tamar, she's in Israel and hopefully listening to this. She actually went out and created a full mapping of the grove of the Palm Canyon Grove for us, and we used that again as a reference for us as we developed the spacing in the park. It's not Disney. We're not trying to say like, look, we exactly copied it in here, but those qualities of irregularity of heights, irregularity of the trunks, some of the densities that might be unusual for an urban park setting. Again, because we had the police substation, we were given a few liberties to allow some of these less visible locations from the street, really came together to form, we think, a pretty unusual landscape to inhabit, and one that is, of course, much more comfortable during these hot daytime hours in Palm Springs. You can see the beards or skirts were left on. That was another decision that we made. You'll see some that are cleaned all the way up because they have our lighting rings on it to get a lot of a uniform evening lighting in the park. We'll show some night views and we'll explain why that was important, again, back to thermal comfort. But that was, again, a decision to try to get closer to that authentic Palm Canyon experience. A few more views. You can see the San Jacintos behind. You can see some of our RIOS designed civic line of chairs at Grand Park. Those ones are pink. We've got a variety of greens and yellows here, and added a rocker for the first time that you'll see here. And you'll also see something fun that we explored with the hardscape. PJ and Jason especially did a lot of research on native or materials that come very close to the region. We call it like hyper local material sourcing is extremely important to achieving that immersive beauty, a real authenticity. So the aggregates that are in the cast in place concrete, Sean's sons did a great job there, are the same that you see in the gravels and then on into the rubbles and on into the boulders throughout the park. So there's a kind of harmonious family of materials that all come from one quarry, and it's all called Palm Springs Gold, poetically enough. And so that materiality that translates down from the vegetation into the rockery areas was a really important design consideration. Here's another kind of fun design challenge that we faced. If you, for a moment, just put your hand over those little colorful pops of the handrails, we were at a crucial point in the project where everything was beige or green. And Jason and I were really into it. We were like, oh, this is gonna be so different than all our RIOS projects that have bright pink or bright yellow. And Mark Rios, in his infinite wisdom, he just said, I think it needs a touch of contrast, a little bit of that cultural framing so that it just doesn't all blur into the background. And that was a challenge for us. Like, okay, how do we subtly infuse the project with those little moments of humanity and accommodation. And in conversations with some of our stakeholders about how seniors need a little bit more help getting up out of different seating positions, the notion of this just a little bit of cultural pop to our armrests emerged as our best solution for solving a few of those challenges. And they really do make the project. All of us who've been out there taking pictures have found ourselves, we always set up our composition so that we've got, lots of rocks and trees and mountains and everything going on, but we usually try to capture a little bit of culture, either people doing something or as a stand-in, these colorful armrests. And for a while we struggled with, should they all be one color? Like, how do we calibrate those to still speak to that authenticity? And this, the team came up with just a wonderful, using the blooms of the native flowers. There's a hesperaloe in the foreground blooming with a really interesting kind of fuchsia pink and we found examples of that throughout our plant palette. So there's moments throughout the year where you're just going to get this harmonization between the living material and these cultural elements and just get that extra little pop in your experience of the park. And here's one of those shapely palms that they do need a little bit more help in their young years and getting established if they're not, straight up and down. So we came up with some ways of propping up and protecting some of the more irregular palms to give our grove some of that funky authenticity. And a few more views. You can see sometimes they're in gravel that felt more like the informality of the Palm Canyon Grove. Sometimes they're in a lawn, which you'll see that lawn is really a place for families to overlook the water feature. You can imagine kids running in and out of the water feature and you can picnic or hang out adjacent. And as I said, in the evening, it's really important that we have a nice light level, because in studying what times of day different programming could go on, this is a park that will, for much of the year, be programmed into the evenings, because that's when people can get out and about after dinner and the temperatures have come down. So we wanted to make sure we had a park that felt very welcoming into the evening and created this glow when you're approaching it in the palm grove. So some of them had their beards come off in order to get those light rings. This is some of the folks who were most involved in the construction, especially, and you'll see PJ and Jason show up all the way back to the early days as well. But so there's Jason on my left. That's a little Nellie Kaufman head looking over his shoulder. There's a movement afoot to hopefully name the park after her. And then EJ on the other side of me, and Crystal and Laura, who really made sure that all of the architectural elements came together as successfully as the landscape. I'm going to move to the second area, the springs and the outcrop. And one of our wonderful team hikes in the surrounding mountains took us up close and personal with Taekwitz Falls. You may remember from that photo of Jim Morrison standing in the water. We've been up there a bunch of times and played around it in different seasons, different water levels with the falls. We actually met with our wonderful colleagues at Fluidity to study the way the natural water moved, and led us to make the case to the city, and fortunately supported having a pretty dramatic waterfall feature as part of our suite of water feature elements. You'll also see some of the geologic references which made their way into the park. You can see a sort of striation to the rock, some of the original up thrusting and angular quality to that striation. You'll see that when we start seeing the walls of the outcrop. And I'll talk a little bit more about the technology of that when we show it in the park. But just again, those team hikes and walks and explorations, our sketching, our note-taking, our walking and talking was important source material all the way through the years of work that it took to bring the project to fruition. And it's a process we like to use at the beginning of our most important projects to bring the team members together, build a real rapport, but also a rapport with the place. So now looking across over the outcrop. So if you imagine to the left of this scene is the parking garage that we're obscuring. And below us, there's an amphitheater space, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the context of the theater. But you see the ocotillos and the palos verdes and mesquites and all of these native plants, and that Palm Springs gold used in lots and lots of different ways. You'll see a whole series of blocks that we used for slope retention and seat walls. This was a great collaboration with QCP. They do lots of custom precast concrete solutions. And so we brought to them this inspiration from our hikes, and we talked about different ways that they might pour in layers, different materials to give us what we came to call a sedimentary finish. And then the challenge was how you translate something that we thought was really successful through one technology up onto those vertical surfaces, because we couldn't pour those. They're not rammed earth because there's water and stuff that has to cascade over them. And so that was a collaboration between us and QCP, and Shaw and Sons, who had done the flat work, also did a shotcrete treatment. And so there's a lot of back and forth between these two fabricators talking about qualities that both of their ways of working could achieve, so that we would have that harmony amongst them. So looking a little closer at the water feature, it's got the Taekwitz Falls inspired portion. You see just above the water feature peeking out is the top level of the parking structure. We've done our best to really, make sure that when you're in the park, you really feel like you're connecting with the larger landscape of the mountains beyond, not with the ends of cars immediately next to you. So we've got the waterfall. There's a series of spring pop-up jets that are, everybody loves seeing the kids interact with those. They surprise you. They can be programmed, do different things. You'll see at night some fun colors and things that those offer. And then, okay, so I will just sort of move along here. This was telling you about the different water features, the mist cloud, then the way that the wind will blow that to actually pass on to people who are passing by. That cooling effect has been particularly wonderful on the hot days so far. And as I said, we all love seeing the kids playing out there. That's been, sometimes you have to kind of go tell their parents, it's okay. I'm a landscape architect. So I'm taking so many pictures of you kids. And some scenes from opening day. Can everybody hear me okay? Lost part of my PowerPoint.
Yes, we can hear you, Nate.
Okay, super. And you can see it now turning into evening. And people come in for their selfie shots. I don't know if you... It's a little Vegas, depending on how you want to program the lights. But for Palm Springs, that's pretty appropriate. You can see how that mist cloud, you can turn it to 11 and it actually becomes, kind of like the one at Huntington, like this 10-foot tall wall of cloud. Okay, so moving on over to the theater and stage area. Our team developed a wonderful shade canopy strategy inspired by the shadow, the dappled light under the palm fronds. And so this is, that slightly elevated zone in front of the amphitheater and event lawn. And on opening night, we were lucky enough to have an ABBA cover band. So that was quite delightful. And dog parades, all sorts of events have been taking place there. You've all seen event lawns, lots of fun when there's lots of people there, but it's also just a casual place to kick a ball or something on a less busy day. And then we'll close it out, and I'll be happy to turn to questions with head out on some ABBA.
All right, so we are monitoring both the Q&A and also the chat box for questions for Nate.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for the interruption. Hopefully we'll be able to splice the two pieces together afterwards. If my face is not on, I will go back on. Here I am again.
All right, thank you, Nate. I'm looking at the chat box, and then I think Evan's checking Q&A, so anybody can drop in and have a question. I have a question for you, Nate.
Sure.
I'll start it off. I actually really enjoyed hearing a lot about how you had in community engagement, and 5 years, as you said, was a lot of dedication to both the history of the site and also dealing with the communities. Was there anything that you found, and not to, seems like the space, as you've shown, is well engaged now, but was there anything that you found was a challenge in particular with the design that some people didn't want to see, or you had to kind of adjust as you move forward?
Yeah, I'll go way back. So we started this process in 2017, but before that, RIOS had been engaged years before, and an earlier version of the design was much more of an event space. Like they were even studying, how do you do ticketing and, almost all hardscape, a very different understanding of what the park was for. And so I think you're seeing our perspective as designers in speaking up for perhaps a more balanced use that has things that are perhaps for everyday comforts and the ability to throw a big party with an ABBA cover band versus some stakeholders that might have seen it as perhaps more of an event venue. And so through the process of sharing alternatives, we explored some that were more down that spectrum towards intensive event use that came with trade-offs. You don't get the Palm Grove, you might not have the water feature, but you would have even more event space. But as you know, with places like that, if it's not fully programmed, so that there's some, we also did the Music Center Plaza above Grand Park, and that is one big hardscape with a water feature in the middle for the most part, because they know they're going to constantly be activating that with cultural programming of all kinds. And here, as we gave physical form to something that the city stakeholders and the conversations they were having was, we don't want this to be just nonstop large events. We don't have that more community focused space in our downtown that you could just, get your ice cream cone and stroll with the kids. And so there was, I think that was a calibration that we helped to advance a vision of a place that could serve the community in different ways at different times. So I think that was one careful, it wasn't that we loved doing event spaces too. We did the work on the Hollywood Bowl. We loved that as well, but we felt like what this place needed was something that transcended just the event and kind of popular culture to something that spoke to those intrinsic qualities that we thought would contribute to a more daily comfort for less intense use as well. Is that helpful in understanding? There were a bunch of other specific details. People wanted a real playground, and we would find our way to say, we hear what you want, and we're trying to make it fit into this larger story of a place. So we'll make things that are playful, but not like, oh, now you're in the playground, and now you're in the theater, and now you're in that. We wanted to really give a sense of you're in a holistic snapshot of a place that has different readings or different ways of using it and experiencing it based on who's there and what's happening at that time.
Nate, here's a question in the Q&A. What is the water source you use for the park fountain?
It is recirculating, but it is a potable source because it's interacted with. So it goes around and around, but it's also periodically topped up as some of it evaporates. And I should point out one fun detail in working with fluidity is the water that you're going to come into intentional contact with, like the shooters there, needs to be treated to a higher standard than a more decorative, we'll say, feature. And so one way that we kept the amount of that mechanical systems and amount of treatment and so forth to a minimum was essentially to create two separate systems. So the upper fountain is recirculating and is only treated to that kind of incidental contact level. And then, of course, the lower fountain is intended for people to run in and out of. Do I expect someone to pull a Jim Morrison and get up in the waterfall? Yeah, probably. Like, it's not going to kill them. But in terms of like code standards, we had to do a number of things too, like that little wall at the seat wall at the base of the waterfall was intended to distinguish it from the rest of the water feature. But it is potable water, recirculating and treated, and then periodically topped up as it evaporates.
Nate, I have another question, just based on parks that we've done with MRCA. We did try to do a really nice, beautiful park that with a water feature, and however, it wasn't as successful because of who's maintaining it. So at that question, did you find that there were issues in who's maintaining it? Is it privately, like, do they have separate people coming in, or is it with the city sanitation department, etc.? And then what were those kind of constraints?
That's a great question. Obviously, when you're dealing with, for example, we're doing a park in downtown Houston that has a public-private client, Houston First, which has a pretty high standard in terms of level of effort that they commit to public spaces. They also are involved in Discovery Green, and that's one set of parameters. And it's not a different commitment, but it's just a different set of resources that a public client has available to them. So their dollar gets stretched further, and as committed as their maintenance and operations staff are, they just have less resources per square foot to invest in that. So it was critical that everything we were doing, because we knew it would be taken care of by the city parks staff, we had to involve them in all of those design decisions. So everything from, many parks departments don't want you to have loose rocks around, because it's like, well, what happens to a rock that someone can pick up, and what's going to go on to everything from that to what kind of trash cans are they part of their standard system. So if someone drives into one, can they easily replace it? Lighting standards, all of those things were carefully discussed. And designers often are a little overboard on wanting to customize everything, and we were guilty of that on occasion. But hopefully, in the end, the compromises were on both sides were for the better for the project. That the things that we thought were less consequential, like the trash can standard, we said, fine, we'll use what you're using everywhere, or the lighting that matches the lighting throughout the downtown district. We worked with the same electrical and matched all the specs for that, because that just is common sense. But we also pushed for, let's say, the sedimentary finish, or things that were a little bit more distinctive, where we thought they would have the most impact. And we made sure that was a mutual decision. So we had city council members touching examples of sedimentary finish and making the case for us to the operations folks. So it wasn't that these were like out of left field. They were real trade-offs, and they each, of course, come with budget considerations, construction and maintenance along the way. So we compromised on a lot of the things that we think you're not going to notice, and we leaned into the things that we think are going to really make it memorable.
Nate, there's a question about how you guys studied the materials that people come in contact with in this extreme heat.
Oh, that's a great one. So we did do a number of tests and mock-ups of the different materials, and especially, obviously you try to stick to lighter tones, but especially where you're going to encourage people to take their shoes off in a place that gets this hot. We're also working in Phoenix and Vegas and other places where this has come up as a concern. And we worked closely with fluidity, and we tested wetting different surfaces. Some of the lessons learned are you want a lot of pore space. So almost like if you were walking on a Rice Krispie treat, that would be like the optimal, well, other than that it would get all sticky in the heat, but like imagine that kind of a surface that has a lot of pore space and that the ability for air to move between those aggregates and that it's a lighter tone. Those are some of the things that you really want to optimize in creating a place where you're going to have people, take their shoes off. Of course, having it wet is instantly cooling, but we just want to make sure that someone pitter-pattering on their way back and forth to the actual water, that those surfaces were as cooling as possible. But it's also, and then of course there's like slip coefficients and all those other aspects to work on. But we worked closely with Shaw and Sons and Fluidity, did mock-ups and things, and arrived at larger aggregates in the areas where people are going to be taking their shoes off. And to Hijay's sourcing, made sure that those aggregates were part of our Palm Springs Gold family of materials.
Evan, do we have any more in the Q&A? Or is that...
No, not at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, looks like I don't see any other real questions in the chat box, but I do want to let all the participants who hung in there with us with our technical difficulties, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to also say, if you're interested in this park and would love to visit, we are going to be doing a second part to this, and with Nate. Well, thank you, Nate, for hosting.
Jason will join us for that one too.
And so we plan to have an actual tour of the site during Modernism Week next month. So look out for more information on that. We'll be sending out. It'll be, and you can tentatively mark your calendars for February 19th. That'll be a Saturday. A tour for ASLA members from 2 to 3 of the park, where we would get our own private tour to walk with Nate and discuss the park even further, take a look, get tactile, touch all these materials that we're talking about.
Take your shoes off.
Yeah, take our shoes off and get crazy. So I'm really excited that that's going to be a second part to this great presentation. So thank you very much, Nate, for this was very, very interesting with how you integrated the cultural site with what needs to be happening and also the current times and dealing with all the programming and stakeholders and everything. It was really well thought out and really beautiful. So thank you very much.
I see some friends in the attendees. Sam Harris brought me to RIOS. So thank you, Sam.
So I guess, yeah, with that, Evan, do you have any other things to say as we close out?
No, just thank you to everyone who was able to join us over their lunch, and we look forward to seeing you at our next lunchtime event.
Okay, thank you all.